I stood outside the bank, holding the receipt in my hand. After 2 years of working overtime, giving up vacations, and cutting back on everything, I'd finally done it. Paid off the last bit of Renee's mom's debt. I don't think I'd ever worked that hard in my life, sacrificing so much just to keep her family from losing their house. I thought it would be worth it. I thought we were worth it. Renee always said I was the rock of our relationship, that she couldn't imagine life without me. So yeah, I believed her. I figured tonight would be different, you know? I imagined coming home, surprising her with the good news, and finally having a night where we didn't worry about bills or how to scrape by. Hell, I even picked up her favorite wine on the way back. The kind I used to think was way too expensive, but screw it, I wanted to celebrate us, to celebrate what we'd worked through together. But when I got home, everything felt off. The house was too quiet. No smell of dinner cooking, no soft music playing in the background like she used to do when she was in a good mood. I called out for Renee, and nothing. Then I noticed her car keys weren't by the door, so I figured she might have stepped out for a minute. I headed upstairs, wine bottle in hand, still thinking we were about to have the night I'd been dreaming about. But as soon as I opened the bedroom door, I saw it. Renee wasn't out. She was there, all right, but she wasn't alone. There she was, my wife, in our bed, with Grant Calloway, of all people. The guy I'd seen once at a work party of hers, a wealthy corporate lawyer, sharp suit and all. I stood there, frozen for what felt like forever. I didn't even drop the damn wine bottle. Renee barely even flinched. She just looked at me, like I'd walked in on her watching TV or something. No panic, no guilt. Nothing. Just cold. I was going to tell you, she said. Sitting up like this was just another conversation. It's over between us, Colton. I'm leaving. I didn't even get a word in. She just kept going, throwing it all in my face. How she'd been seeing Grant for months. How they'd planned everything out. Apparently, my sacrifices didn't mean a damn thing to her anymore. She made it clear, she wanted more. More than the life I'd worked so hard to give her. I want a life of luxury, Colton. You just can't give that to me. Grant can, she said. Her words hit harder than anything I'd ever experienced. I sacrificed everything, and now she was walking away. For a second, I couldn't believe it. This woman, who I thought was my partner, had been lying to me for months. Maybe years. My stomach dropped. I don't know how long I stood there, holding that bottle of wine like some idiot, while Renee threw everything we had right in my face. I mean, I just paid off her mother's debt. A debt that wasn't even mine to worry about. But none of that seemed to matter to her. Not anymore. I'm leaving, Colton. I've made up my mind, she said again, like it was already decided and I didn't have a say in any of it. She didn't even have the decency to feel bad about it. I tried to speak, but no words came out at first. My chest was tight, and everything inside me was screaming, but all I could manage was a simple why. She sighed, like I was being unreasonable or something. Look at us. We're stuck, Colton. You're always working. I need more than what this life can offer. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life scraping by. I stared at her, the woman I had built a life with, who I thought would be there for me just as much as I'd been there for her. We're not scraping by. I'm working to give us a future. She shook her head, almost pitying me. That's the problem. You think hard work is enough. Grant, she glanced at him, and it took everything in me not to throw the bottle at his smug face. He showed me there's more to life than just getting by. I couldn't believe it. She was talking about me like I was some loser, like everything I'd done was pointless. All those late nights, the overtime, the days I dragged myself home just to collapse into bed, thinking I was doing it for us, for her. And here she was, telling me she wanted more. More than me. I dropped the wine bottle, letting it roll across the floor. So that's it? You're just walking away. She didn't flinch. I need more, Colton. And Grant can give me that. It hit me then, the cold truth sinking in. Renee had been planning this for a while. All those nights she'd come home late, all the time she was too tired or too busy to talk. It wasn't just work stress like I thought. She was already checked out, already building a new life with this guy right under my nose. And I, like a fool, had been working my ass off to pay for her mother's house, thinking it was for us. The betrayal stung, but underneath that, I felt something else, a rage that was starting to boil over. I had been used, discarded like trash when she found something shinier. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. I wasn't going to go down quietly. After she said her piece, Renee stood up, not even bothering to cover herself. She walked right past me like I didn't exist. I couldn't move. My hands clenched into fists as Grant finally got up from the bed, slowly pulling on his shirt, trying to act all calm and collected like this was just another Tuesday for him. The audacity of it made me want to tear into him, but something told me that's exactly what he expected. Grant finally spoke, his voice as smooth as ever. "Listen, Colton, no need to make this harder than it has to be. Renee's made her choice." I could barely process what he said. Harder? Harder? I had just sacrificed 2 years of my life to pay off a debt that wasn't even mine, and this guy was acting like I should just roll over and accept it. Renee didn't even glance back as she headed downstairs, calling out over her shoulder, "I'll be out by the end of the week. You can keep the house." Keep the house? The house I worked for? The house I thought would be where we'd build our future? She was acting like she was doing me a favor by letting me have the scraps. Something in me snapped. I stormed after her, ignoring Grant's smug presence. "You're not walking away from this like it's nothing, Renee. What the hell happened to us? What happened to you?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I needed answers, something that would make this all make sense. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her hand on the railing. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd show some emotion, some regret. But when she turned around, all I saw was coldness in her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about, Colton. I've made up my mind. Grant's offering me a life I deserve, one that doesn't involve struggling paycheck to paycheck." Struggling? Paycheck to paycheck? We weren't struggling. I was busting my ass to make sure we had a future, a home, stability. How could she say that? And all of this, all the nights you came home late, the distance, it was because of him? I asked, almost begging her to tell me it wasn't true, that there was some other explanation. But she just shrugged, as if it wasn't even worth denying. "It started a while ago. And honestly, it made me realize what I really want." Her casual dismissal of everything we'd built together hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been breaking myself for us, while she was already planning her exit. I stood there, watching her pack up pieces of our life like they meant nothing. I should have felt broken, but all I felt was rage. The kind that builds so deep inside you that it's like a fire you can't put out. They thought they could play me. Thought they could walk away clean. But they didn't know me. I wasn't the kind of guy who just takes a beating and gives up. As I watched Renee walk out the door without a single look back, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving me standing in the middle of the house, just empty. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind kept racing, bouncing between anger and disbelief. This was the woman I had given everything to, the one I thought I'd spend my life with. And she just left, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. Grant was gone too. I didn't even see him leave. He probably slipped out while I was trying to process everything Renee had said. It didn't matter. I'd deal with him soon enough. I stood there in silence for a long time, staring at the front door. My hand started to shake, and before I knew it, I knocked over the damn wine bottle. It shattered against the floor, spraying shards of glass everywhere. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night to mark the end of 2 years of sacrifice. Instead, it was the night I realized everything I thought I was building had been a lie. My knees buckled, and I sat down right there in the mess, my back against the wall. The weight of it all hit me at once. How could I have been so blind? How long had she been playing me? Every late night she brushed off, every moment she acted distant. I had chalked it up to stress, to life getting hard. I thought we were working through it together. Turns out, she was already checked out, already planning her escape with someone else. And Grant? That slimy corporate lawyer. He wasn't just some random fling. He was everything I wasn't, rich, connected, offering her a life of luxury. The kind of life she suddenly decided she deserved. All the times I thought I was enough for her, I was just playing the fool. I sat there for what felt like hours, just going over every conversation, every little moment I'd ignored or excused. I was mad at her, furious at him, but most of all, I was mad at myself. How could I not have seen this coming? Eventually, I forced myself to stand up. The house was dead quiet, and it felt like a graveyard. The smell of spilled wine filled the air, and the only sound was the crunch of glass under my boots. I cleaned up the mess mechanically, not even thinking about it, just moving on autopilot. Once the floor was cleared, I collapsed onto the couch. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding me of just how alone I was now. Renee had made her choice. She wanted luxury. She wanted Grant. But the thing about betrayal is it doesn't end when they walk out the door. No, it lingers. It burns. And I wasn't the kind of man to just let that burn turn to ash. They thought they could play me, walk away without consequences. But I wasn't done yet. As I sat there in the dark, my mind started working in ways it hadn't before. They thought they were in control, but they had underestimated me. And that was going to be their biggest mistake. I spent the next few days in a fog. It was like I was moving through quicksand, each step harder than the last. Work was a blur. I showed up, did what I had to, but my mind was somewhere else. I couldn't stop thinking about Renee and Grant. The betrayal ran deep, and I kept asking myself over and over, how could she do this? But then something shifted. One night, after coming home to the empty house again, I started going through our things. I don't even know why at first. Maybe I was looking for answers, something that could explain how everything fell apart. Maybe I was looking for signs that I had missed. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop myself. I opened drawers, checked her phone bills, her emails. It was like a compulsion. And that's when I found it. Renee wasn't just leaving me for Grant because he was rich. No, there was more to it. Hidden deep in her emails were conversations, long threads of messages between her and Grant. At first, they looked like normal stuff, meeting up for dinner, talking about their future. It was sickening enough on its own, reading about how she'd planned her life with him while still living with me. But then I saw it. They weren't just having an affair. They were in business together. The emails talked about properties, investments, deals. It was all legal talk, and I almost didn't catch it, but there was something off. They were discussing manipulating property values, buying low, pushing certain deals through, and then flipping the properties at inflated prices. It was all too convenient, too coordinated. Grant, being the lawyer, knew exactly how to make it all sound clean. But I wasn't stupid. I knew a scam when I saw one. My blood ran cold. They weren't just betraying me, they were conning people. And from the looks of it, they were pretty deep into it. Real estate fraud. I sat there, staring at the screen, piecing it all together. Renee had connections through her job in local real estate, and Grant had the legal expertise to cover their tracks. They were using those connections to manipulate property values, pushing deals through under the radar. It was dirty, and it was big. This wasn't just about money or luxury anymore. This was criminal. Suddenly, the anger I felt wasn't just about being betrayed as a husband. I was furious as a man who had been lied to on every level. Renee wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't just some lost soul looking for a better life. She was actively involved in fraud. And Grant? He was the mastermind behind it all, using his corporate lawyer charm to pull the strings. I had been a fool for so long, but not anymore. Now I had the truth, and with the truth came power. I spent the entire night going through every email, every piece of evidence I could find. I printed out everything. I wanted a record of it, something I could hold on to, something I could use. Because if they thought they could just walk away and live happily ever after with their stolen money and fake luxury, they were dead wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan forming in my head. They thought they could play me. They thought they could win. But I wasn't done yet. I was going to make sure that their perfect little life came crashing down around them. And this time, I'd be the one pulling the strings. The next morning, I could feel the shift inside me. It was like a switch had flipped. The pain was still there, the betrayal still fresh, but now it had a focus. I wasn't just some guy left behind for a wealthier life. I was about to take control of this mess and turn it back on them. I spent the day at work going through the motions, but my mind was laser-focused on what I had found. I knew I couldn't just confront Renee and Grant without a solid plan. They were slick, especially Grant. He was a corporate lawyer, used to manipulating situations, twisting things in his favor. If I came at them without anything to back me up, they'd bury me. But I had the emails, the proof. And I was going to use it. That night, I started digging deeper. I pulled up everything I could find on Grant. Turns out, His firm was known for pushing the limits when it came to legal dealings. They had a reputation for playing in the gray areas of the law, shady enough to raise eyebrows, but clean enough to avoid serious consequences. That's how guys like Grant operated, always just inside the lines, just slippery enough to stay out of jail. But this was different. This wasn't some minor corporate loophole. This was outright fraud. I contacted an old friend of mine, Danny, who worked in real estate law. We hadn't talked much in the last few years, but we were close once. I knew he wasn't exactly a fan of lawyers like Grant, the types who bent the rules and left the smaller guys to clean up the mess. Colton? Long time, man. What's up? Danny sounded surprised to hear from me, but not in a bad way. I didn't waste time. Danny, I need your help. I've come across something big. Fraud. Real estate. And I think I'm sitting on a mountain of evidence. Danny paused for a second, then lowered his voice. You're not involved, are you? No, I said quickly. But I know people who are. And they're trying to screw over a lot of people, myself included. He sighed. Send me what you've got. But, Colton, be careful. If you're going after who I think you are, they won't take this lightly. I know. That's why I'm coming to you first. I emailed Danny everything, the emails, the property deals, the transactions. He called me back the next day, and I could tell from the tone in his voice that I had been right. Colton, this is bad. Really bad. If this gets out, they're going to be facing serious charges: fraud, manipulation of property values, conspiracy. The whole 9 yards. And Grant? Can he worm his way out of this? Danny chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Not if the evidence is this clear. They've been sloppy, thinking no one would connect the dots. But if you're asking whether he'll try, hell yes. Lawyers like him always try. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all settling in. I had them. But this was just the beginning. Do you think this can be taken to the authorities? I asked, already knowing the answer. Absolutely, Danny replied. But you need to be smart about this. If you go straight to the cops, they might lawyer up fast. You need to make sure there's no room for them to wriggle out. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I have a plan. I'm going to make sure they don't get the chance to cover this up. After the call, I sat there, staring at the stack of papers I had printed out. Evidence, all of it, sitting right in front of me. I could already picture the look on Grant's face when it all came crashing down. He thought he was untouchable, but he wasn't. Not anymore. As for Renee, I didn't even know what I wanted from her anymore. Revenge? Maybe. Justice? Definitely. But part of me just wanted her to feel what I felt. Betrayal, loss, everything she had thrown at me when she chose Grant and his luxury over the life we had built. They were going to pay. I didn't know exactly how it would all unfold yet, but I was ready to take them down, step by step. And by the end of it, I'd make sure they knew exactly who they had crossed. The plan started coming together over the next few days. I knew I couldn't just hand the evidence over and expect everything to magically work out. No, I had to be smarter than that. Renee and Grant had been playing me for months, years probably, and I wasn't about to let them off easy. I decided to bide my time, wait for the right moment to strike. I wasn't just looking for justice. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. I wanted them to know that I had been the one to tear down everything they'd built on lies. I made sure everything was in place. Danny helped me fine-tune the legal side, showing me what would stick in court and what wouldn't. But before going to the authorities, I had one more move to make. I had to confront them first. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about watching them squirm, seeing the fear in their eyes when they realized they couldn't get out of this. Grant was hosting some high-end corporate event the following weekend, a gathering of real estate moguls, lawyers, and a bunch of people with more money than morals. Renee had mentioned it a few times in the past, bragging about the kind of network Grant was bringing her into. I knew she'd be there. I wasn't invited, obviously, but that wasn't going to stop me. I suited up and walked in like I belonged there, nodding at a few guests as I made my way through the crowd. The event was in some upscale hotel ballroom, chandeliers hanging overhead, waiters passing around champagne like water. It was everything Renee had ever wanted, a life of luxury, connections, and expensive everything. I spotted them near the back, standing with a group of Grant's associates. Renee, wearing one of those designer dresses I never could have afforded, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Grant was right next to her, shaking hands and talking business. They looked like the perfect power couple, living the dream while I was left in the dust. The sight of them together made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. I wasn't there to cause a scene. Not yet, anyway. I grabbed a drink, kept to the shadows, and watched. I was waiting for the right moment, the perfect time to let them know that their world was about to come crashing down. After what felt like an eternity, Grant stepped away from the group, heading toward the bar. I followed, timing it so we were side by side when he ordered his drink. He didn't recognize me at first, just gave me a polite nod. "Grant," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. He turned, and when he saw my face, the smile faded. "Colton." He said my name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "We need to talk," I said, taking a step closer so no one could overhear. Grant didn't flinch. He was used to confrontation. As a lawyer, he probably dealt with it all the time. "Now's not the time, Colton. I'm sure you have things to say, but this isn't the place." "Oh, it's the perfect place," I said, my voice low but firm. "Because this time, I'm the one holding the cards." He gave me that smug lawyer smile, the one he probably used to disarm clients and juries. "Look, I get that you're upset, but Renee." "This isn't about Renee," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "This is about the real estate deals. The fraud. You and Renee have been playing dirty, and I've got the proof." His face didn't change much, but I saw a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe? Panic? He quickly masked it, but I knew I had hit a nerve. "Colton, I don't know what you think you've found, but I have emails, contracts, everything. You've been manipulating property values, screwing people over, all while making sure you and Renee come out on top." Grant took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "If you had anything real, you wouldn't be here telling me about it. You'd be at the police station." "I will be," I said, leaning in closer. "But I wanted to give you a choice first. You can either come clean, confess everything, or I go public with this. And trust me, when this hits, you'll be finished." For the first time, I saw the smugness slip. His jaw tightened, and his grip on his drink hardened. He was calculating, trying to figure out how serious I was. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Am I?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a copy of one of the emails, handing it to him. "That's just a taste. Imagine what happens when I send the rest to the authorities, and to every major client you've ever worked with." Grant's eyes scanned the email, and I could see him piecing it together, realizing how deep I'd gone. He knew he was screwed, and for the first time, it showed. Before he could respond, I glanced over at Renee, who was still laughing with her new rich friends, completely unaware of what was happening. "You and Renee played me. You built this whole thing on lies. But it's over now." Grant opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "You have 2 days. Either you confess, or I burn it all down." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the email still in his hand. It wasn't over yet. But the trap was set. After walking away from Grant, I made my way through the crowd, heart pounding but steady. I had thrown the first punch, and I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't sure how to handle it. But there was one more piece to the puzzle, and that was Renee. She hadn't seen me yet, and part of me wanted to avoid her altogether, but I knew that if I didn't face her now, it would eat me alive. She was laughing with her friends, acting like she didn't have a care in the world. It was like watching a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, kind, supportive, my partner, she was gone. This version of Renee was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had turned into a person I couldn't even stand to look at. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not yet. I approached her, cutting through the circle of her high society friends. One of them, some older woman draped in jewels, gave me a confused look. I didn't care. I was done playing nice. "Renee, we need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. She turned, surprised to see me, but quickly masked it with a smile. "Colton? What are you doing here?" Her friends exchanged glances, sensing the tension. One of the women shifted uncomfortably, and another excused herself from the group. Renee glanced around, trying to keep her composure, but I could tell she was rattled by my presence. "We're talking now," I said, not giving her the option to brush me off. She sighed, flashing her friends a tight smile before walking with me to the side of the room. When we were far enough from the crowd, she crossed her arms and gave me a look like I was the one being unreasonable. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to sound indifferent, but I could hear the edge in her voice. I didn't bother with small talk. "I know everything, Renee. About you and Grant. The real estate fraud, the emails, the deals you've been manipulating. I know it all." Her face paled, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly, shaking her head. "Colton, you don't know what you're talking about. Whatever you think you found, it's not what it looks like." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the emails, the contracts. I've got copies of everything. You and Grant have been running a scam, screwing people over for profit. And now, you're going to pay for it." She stared at me, and for a second, I thought she might actually try to deny it again. But then her expression changed, hardening into something colder, something cruel. "And what are you going to do, Colton?" "Run to the police," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You think they'll believe you over us? Grant has connections. He'll bury you before you can even make a move." I stepped closer, my anger boiling just below the surface. "Maybe he'll try. But I've already spoken to a lawyer, Renee. I know exactly what you've done, and I know exactly how to take you both down." She glared at me, but I could see the panic starting to creep in. She wasn't as confident as she pretended to be. "Not anymore. You were always like this," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "So focused on doing things the right way, on working yourself to the bone. You think that makes you better than me? You think your hard work will save you now?" I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I don't need to be better than you. I just need to expose you for what you are, a liar and a criminal. And trust me, Renee, when this all comes out, no amount of luxury will save you." She didn't say anything, just stood there, her jaw clenched. I could tell she was fighting to keep her composure, but it was slipping. She knew she was cornered, and there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. "You have 2 days," I said, echoing the same ultimatum I had given Grant. "Confess. Come clean. Or I'll take everything to the authorities, and you'll lose it all." For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me with a mixture of fury and fear. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd. I watched her go, my heart pounding, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, there was just a hollow ache where something else used to be. The woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed so much for, was gone. Maybe she had been gone for a long time, and I was just now seeing it for what it was. But this wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice. About making sure they couldn't keep getting away with what they'd done. And I wasn't going to stop until I got it. After confronting Renee, I walked out of that hotel with a strange calm. I wasn't proud, I wasn't relieved. It was more like the calm before a storm, the quiet when you know something big is about to break. I had given them the warning, handed them the chance to do the right thing, but I didn't believe for a second they would take it. Grant and Renee weren't the type to fold easily. They were too arrogant, too sure of themselves, to believe they could lose. But that's where they were wrong. The evidence I had wasn't just some threat I was waving in front of them. It was real, and once I handed it over, there would be no going back for them. The next 2 days felt like the longest of my life. Every minute, I was waiting, watching my phone, half expecting a call from Renee or Grant, maybe even some lawyer trying to negotiate. But the phone stayed silent. I kept myself busy, double-checking everything with Danny, making sure all the documents were airtight, reviewing the steps we'd take once the deadline passed. On the second night, I sat alone in the house, staring at the clock. It was almost midnight, and I knew they were out of time. No confessions, no apologies, nothing. I wasn't surprised, but still it hit me hard. There was no turning back now. I picked up the phone and dialed Danny. "It's time," I said when he answered. "You're sure?" he asked, like he was giving me one last out. "I'm sure," I replied, the weight of it settling over me. They had their chance. "Now we do this." Danny agreed, and we planned to move forward first thing in the morning. He'd already started preparing everything for law enforcement and the real estate board, lining up all the documents, the evidence, and the official complaints. Once it was filed, the investigation would start, and there would be no hiding for Renee and Grant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing, going over everything in my head, replaying the moments when my life fell apart, and wondering how it had come to this. The anger I'd felt, the betrayal, it was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A sense of finality, maybe. Like once I pushed that button, everything would change. At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping on cold coffee, waiting for the sun to rise. My mind was spinning, but one thought cut through the noise. I had nothing left to lose. The woman I loved was gone, my life as I knew it was over, and the only thing left was making sure they didn't walk away unscathed. By the time Danny called me back, everything was set. The paperwork was filed, the authorities were officially notified, and the gears were turning. "It's done," he said simply. I didn't say anything at first, just stared out the window as the sun started creeping up over the horizon. I thought I'd feel something, maybe a sense of victory, of finally getting back at them, but all I felt was exhaustion. The kind that comes after you've been fighting for so long, you don't know what to do with yourself when it's over. "You all right?" Danny asked. "Yeah," I lied, rubbing a hand over my face. "Just tired." "You did the right thing, Colton," he added. "This needed to happen." "I know," I said, even though it didn't make me feel any better. "Thanks, Danny. For everything." We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, just letting the silence wash over me. The next few weeks would be chaos, I knew that. The investigation would hit Grant's career hard, and once the news got out, Renee's reputation would be destroyed. They'd fight it, of course, but the evidence was too solid for them to squirm out of this. In a few hours, the calls would start. I'd probably hear from Renee, maybe even Grant, begging or threatening me to drop it. But it was too late for that now. They had made their bed, and I was going to make damn sure they had to lie in it. For now, though, I just sat there, waiting for the storm to hit. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to begin. By noon, my phone started buzzing, an unknown number. I stared at it for a second, already knowing who it would be. Grant, most likely. Maybe Renee. Either way, they were going to try and talk their way out of this. I picked up the phone, holding it to my ear without saying anything. There was a pause on the other end before I heard Grant's voice, smooth as ever, but now with an edge of panic he couldn't quite hide. "Colton," he began, trying to sound calm. "We need to talk." I stayed silent for a moment, letting the tension build. "Talk," I said, my voice flat. "You've made a mistake," he said, jumping straight to the point. "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but you're wrong. This isn't what you think it is. The deals were legal, and if you move forward with this, you'll regret it." I almost laughed at how predictable he was. Even when he was cornered, he tried to intimidate, tried to sound like he was still in control. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. "I've seen the emails, Grant. The contracts. The manipulation. I know exactly what it is," I replied, keeping my tone cold. "And I'm not the one who's going to regret anything." There was a pause, and I could hear him take a breath, probably realizing the usual scare tactics weren't going to work on me. "Colton, listen, there's no need to make this ugly. We can settle this quietly. No one has to get hurt. You want compensation? We can work something out." "Compensation," I repeated, my anger flaring up again. "You think this is about money? You think you can pay me off after what you've done?" "Everyone has a price," he said, slipping into lawyer mode. "I can make this go away, Colton. You don't need to ruin your life over this." "Ruin my life?" The audacity of it almost knocked the wind out of me. After everything he and Renee had done, after they destroyed my marriage, my future, he had the nerve to act like I was the one making a mess. "I'm not the one whose life is about to be ruined," I shot back. "You and Renee had your chance. You could have come clean. Now it's too late." He went quiet again, probably weighing his options. I could picture him standing there in his office, phone in hand, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to protect himself. But he wasn't going to charm his way out of this. "You're making a big mistake, Colton," Grant said, his voice hardening. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it. You don't know what you're up against." I tightened my grip on the phone, my patience running thin. "No, Grant. You don't know what you're up against. I've got everything, and I'm not backing down. So do yourself a favor and start preparing for the fallout, because it's coming." He was silent for a moment longer, then finally he spoke again, his voice cold. "You think you've won? You're just a pawn in this, Colton. You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Then I guess we'll see," I said, before hanging up the phone. I sat there, staring at the screen as my hands shook with adrenaline. The conversation had gone exactly how I expected. Grant trying to manipulate, trying to control the situation, but he didn't understand that I wasn't afraid anymore. He couldn't scare me into backing down, not after everything they had done. It was only a matter of time before Renee called. I wondered what her approach would be: tears, apologies, maybe even more lies. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her voice, but a part of me was curious. Curious to see how far she'd go to protect herself. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Renee. When Renee's name flashed on my phone, my heart did this strange twist in my chest. I stared at it for a few seconds, debating whether I even wanted to hear what she had to say. But I knew I had to. I needed to hear her try to explain herself, try to twist things around like she always did. I answered, but didn't say a word. "Colton." Her voice was softer than I expected, like she was trying to sound apologetic, maybe even regretful. "We need to talk." I stayed silent, letting her squirm in the silence. She knew what this was about. She had to know. "Please, can we just talk?" she continued, her voice wavering. "I know you're upset, and I know I've hurt you, but—" "Hurt me?" I finally spoke, cutting her off. "You didn't just hurt me, Renee. You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our life together. You lied to me. You used me. Don't act like this was some minor mistake." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, and for a second, I wondered if she was going to hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice tight with desperation. "Colton, you have to understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It got out of control. I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." "Complicated?" I said, my anger rising again. "You were running a scam, Renee. You and Grant were lying, cheating, manipulating people. You didn't just leave me, you tried to ruin lives for your own gain. So don't sit there and tell me this was just complicated." "I didn't know it would go this far," she blurted out, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what I was getting into with Grant. He made it sound so easy, like it was just business." She stopped, choking on her words. I could hear the panic in her voice, and for a split second, a part of me wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that she didn't mean for things to spiral out of control, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as cold-hearted as she'd seemed. But then I remembered the emails, the lies, the way she looked at me when she walked out of the house. "You made your choice, Renee," I said, my voice hardening. "You chose Grant. You chose luxury over love, over everything we built. And now, you want to act like you didn't know? Like you were just along for the ride? Don't insult me." She let out a shaky breath. "I was wrong. I know that now. I don't even care about the money anymore. I don't want to lose everything." I almost laughed. There it was, the real reason she was calling. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. She didn't want to lose her new life, the comfort, the connections. She didn't want to lose Grant. "You don't care about losing everything?" I repeated. "You already lost everything, Renee. You lost me. You lost our future. And for what? A richer life. A man who could offer you more." She didn't answer. I could hear her sniffling, trying to hold back tears, but I didn't care. This was her mess, and she was finally realizing that she couldn't clean it up with an apology or by playing the victim. "Colton. I'm sorry," she whispered. I clenched my fist, the words hitting me harder than I thought they would. Sorry. That was all she had? After everything, a weak apology? "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said quietly. "Sorry doesn't undo the lies. The cheating. The fraud. You made your bed, Renee. Now you have to lie in it. Please," she begged. "Please don't go through with this. We can figure something out. I'll leave Grant. I'll come back. We can fix this. I know we can." Her words hung in the air, desperate and pathetic. She was grasping at straws, trying to pull me back in, but it was too late. Way too late. The woman I loved was gone, and all that was left was a stranger who would say anything to save herself. "You think coming back will fix this?" I asked, my voice cold. "You think I want you back after what you've done? After what you've become?" She started to cry, her sobs muffled on the other end of the line. I waited for a moment, letting her cry, letting her realize how far she had fallen. "Goodbye, Renee," I said finally, the weight of it lifting off my chest. And then I hung up. When Renee's name popped up on my phone, I knew this call wasn't going to change anything. I answered, waiting for her to speak. "Colton, can we talk?" Her voice was shaky, like she was trying to hold it together. I didn't respond, just let the silence hang. Please, I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this, she continued, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. Complicated? I finally replied, my anger bubbling up. You lied, cheated, and conned people with Grant. Don't act like this was some innocent mistake. I didn't know it would get this far, she pleaded. I don't want to lose everything. I almost laughed. You already lost everything, Renee. You lost me. You lost our life. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. Sorry doesn't fix it, I said. You made your choice. Please, she begged, desperation creeping in. I'll leave Grant. I'll come back. We can fix this, I know we can. I shook my head, the weight of her words not even hitting me like they used to. It was all just noise now. You think coming back will change what you did? I don't want you back. She started to cry, her sobs filling the silence. I waited, letting her cry, letting her feel the weight of it all. Goodbye, Renee, I said and hung up. The finality of it settled over me like a quiet relief. The morning after those calls, I woke up to chaos. It didn't take long for the news to break. Emails and documents were being reviewed by the authorities, and the investigation was officially underway. Grant and Renee's names were being dragged through the mud, and the real estate world was buzzing with whispers of fraud and criminal charges. I stayed off social media, but it didn't matter. The headlines started popping up on my phone. Grant Calloway, the respected corporate lawyer, was under investigation for real estate fraud. His connections, his reputation, everything was crumbling. And Renee? She was tied up in it all. Her face wasn't in the news, but people were starting to talk. In a small town, rumors spread fast. Danny called to update me. It's going public faster than we thought, he said. They're in deep trouble. The evidence is solid, Colton. There's no way they're getting out of this without major consequences. I listened, feeling that strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness again. This was what I wanted, right? To see them pay, to watch their perfect little world come crashing down around them. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt done. I stayed quiet, focusing on what came next. The investigation would take time, and Grant would fight it with everything he had, but the damage was done. His career was over. Their future, the one they had built on lies, was in ruins. Are you okay? Danny asked after a long pause. Yeah, I lied. I'm good. We hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my house, the same house I had worked so hard to protect. Everything had changed so fast. The anger, the betrayal, the revenge, it had all driven me for so long. And now? Now there was nothing left but the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. The fallout had begun, and I had won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like the end. As the investigation unfolded, I watched from the sidelines. Every day, more news trickled in. Grant's name splashed across headlines, his firm distancing themselves, clients jumping ship. The once untouchable lawyer was now the center of a scandal, his reputation crumbling with every new report. And Renee? She disappeared from the public eye. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had quit her job, probably to avoid the fallout. I imagined her hiding away, trying to figure out how to salvage the life she thought she was building. But there was no coming back from this. Not for her. Not for him. One day, I saw a headline that hit harder than the rest. Calloway faces multiple charges in real estate fraud case. That was it. The final nail. The investigation was no longer just talk, legal action was coming. It was all crashing down. But what surprised me most was how numb I felt. I thought I'd be elated, finally seeing the people who had ruined my life get what they deserved. But instead I just felt tired. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party or even call Danny to celebrate. I just sat with it, realizing that watching them fall wasn't going to heal me. It didn't change what they had done or how much it had cost me. One evening, sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, I thought about everything I had lost. Renee, the life we had, even the future I thought we'd build together, it was all gone. But for the first time in a long while, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to rebuild. Not the same life, but something new. Something that wasn't tied to the betrayal, the lies, or the past. Grant and Renee were going down, but for the first time, I didn't care. I was done being wrapped up in their mess. It was time to focus on what was next for me, not them. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on. Grant and Renee's lives were torn apart by the investigation, and the news slowly faded into the background. It was almost strange, watching everything unravel from a distance, like it was a movie playing out in front of me while I sat quietly detached. But now, with the storm behind me, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, alone with my thoughts, without the constant drive for revenge. I didn't have to check headlines or wait for the next twist in their downfall. That part of my life was over. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I had to figure out what came next. I started small. Fixing things around the house, going back to work with a little more focus. I started talking to a few friends I had distanced myself from during the whole mess. I even reached out to my sister, who I hadn't spoken to in months, just to catch up. It felt good, like I was slowly pulling myself out of the wreckage and finding pieces of myself that I thought were lost. There were still moments when the weight of it all hit me, the betrayal, the anger. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about Renee, wondering how she was coping, if she regretted any of it. But then I'd remind myself that it didn't matter. That chapter was closed. One weekend, I packed up my old truck and drove out to the coast. It was something I hadn't done in years, just take a trip for myself. I sat on the beach, staring out at the ocean, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt calm. I had spent so long fighting, being consumed by the need to make things right, that I forgot what it was like to just breathe. To just exist without the weight of it all crushing me. As the sun set over the water, I realized something. I wasn't the man I used to be, the one who bent over backward for people who didn't deserve it, the one who let himself be played and betrayed. I had changed. I was stronger now. I had been broken, but I wasn't going to stay broken. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and I didn't have everything figured out. But for the first time, I felt ready to move forward. Ready to rebuild, not just the pieces of my life, but myself. Grant and Renee? They were just a part of my past now, a painful, twisted part, but behind me all the same. I was done with them. And as I sat there on the beach, the cool breeze in my face, I knew one thing for sure, I was going to be okay. Maybe even better than okay. This was my fresh start.